In this video, we're going to walk through deploying out a Monorepo setup with Cleavr. For our example Monorepo, we're going to use Strappy's Food Advisor website. So in this demo, we get to actually show a couple cool things. One is to deploy out this Monorepo. Another one is to deploy out a Strappy 4 API. And a third thing is to deploy out a front end, which is for this website, React. To look at the Monorepo setup, I copied over Food Advisor over into my account on GitHub. You could also fork this from strappy/Food Advisor. Just to highlight the common Monorepo setup is we have two main directories on this root level. So on the root level, we see a bunch of information, the README, all this stuff that you would expect at the root. And then under the API directory is the backend, and under the client directory is the front end. So you can name these really whatever you want. Sometimes you might see them labeled as API client. Sometimes you might see the API just labeled as backend and client as the front end. Either way, or whatever way you want to do it, Cleavr will be able to handle it. Okay, so let's deploy this out. I'm just going to close these two here. In Cleavr, start with a fresh server. Let's start with adding the backend. The backend we're going to select as Strappy version 4. So we'll select Strappy 4. And then we'll just use a Cleavr temporary domain for this example. And let's open up advanced settings. We will need to configure the port number a little more explicitly. Within this particular Strappy project, they have it hard-coded to port 1337. For database, we could keep this disabled. We don't need to create a new database since it uses SQLite. And from here, we're okay to click on Add. And then for our front end, we'll click on Add Site and select Node.js SSR. And again, we'll use a temporary domain. Let's click on Advanced Options. Instead of explicitly stating the entry point as a file, we could just use npm for an entry point and then argument start. And artifact folder, so for a React app, it does go into .next. And then port number, let's just keep this as the default as well for a React app, which is port 3000. And click on Add to add in our front-end React site. All right, awesome. So we have our backend app and we have our front-end app. So let's go over to the web apps for these corresponding sites. Just going to click on Setup and Deploy, and that's going to take me into the configuration for the front end. And for code repository, all right, so it's on GitHub, so I'm going to select my GitHub version control provider. And then I have it under my account since I forked it. And let's see, I'll just put an ARM guitar. Actually, let's make it a little more simple. And then Food Advisor, select that. And it was the master branch. And for the front end, this is really where the Monorepo configurations come into play. So it's going to be under the app folder client in this case. So we'll add client there. That way it points directly to that folder. And click on Update. All right, so now that we've tied in the code repository and designated the Monorepo subfolder client, let's go to the Environments tab here, and there is a couple environment variables that we need to add, which is the next public API. We could just keep it to the localhost 1337 port. That's going to be our backend and preview secret. So I just copied and pasted this over from what they had in their example env file, and then we'll click on Sync. And that's going to sync this env file to the server. And at this point, for the front end, we should be able to just deploy it out. So let's click on Deploy from the Deployments tab. And as this goes through the deployment process, let's go back and switch over to our backend app. So this is our backend Strappy app, and we also want to point this to a code repository. So same thing that we did for the front end app, we're going to select GitHub, and for the repository Food Advisor, the branch should be master, and then for the app folder for the backend, it was labeled API. So let's click on Update to update that information. And same thing that we did for the front end app, we got to do for the backend app. We'll go to the environment and add a couple environment variables. We have some default ones here. Let's just paste over that. And the main thing is we have our port number and the local host for the front end, which is port 3000, and then another client preview secret token. Again, I just took this directly from their example app. Let's click on Sync. Before we actually deploy this out, there is one extra thing that we should do under the deployment hook section. and that is seed the database. So we'll add a new hook, click on add hook on the top right, and then we could just call this yarn seed, which is the command that's going to run. And we want to make sure that within the release path that we point this specifically to the API folder. For the command, it is yarn seed, and that should seed our database. So let's add that here, and we'll move that above where it says link media uploads. Yeah, we'll just move it right there so that this action is completed before it links the upload folder. Okay, let's go ahead to the deployment section and click on deploy. And while this is deploying, let's actually go back and go to the front end and see what our progress is here. All right, so it's completed. And if I click on the site, I expect nothing to show up, which is exactly right. We just see a 404 error. Let's check on our API and see how that deployment's doing. All right, so it's on the build asset step. So we'll just wait for the backend to deploy, and then we'll check out the site again. Awesome, it looks like our backend has deployed and we're seeing some 200s. So if we click on visit site, we should be able to see the Strapi API view. And perfect, we see the default landing page for the Strapi API. So I could go in here and create an administrator and all that good stuff, but I don't need to do that since we've seeded the database. So the moment of truth comes in when we go back to the front end, and let's click on the front end React web app, and let's visit the site. And all right, so now we have our food advisor app that we just deployed out, and we can click around and take a look at it. And this is how you could deploy out a monorepo. In this example, we have our backend using Strapi version 4 and our front end using React.